everybody, and joining us today. We are delighted to welcome you to EuropaBio's National Association's Presidency Summit. My name is Dr. Skentelbery. I'm the Director General of EuropaBio, and I have the pleasure of opening and closing the meeting today. I will start with a very small amount of housekeeping, and in that we welcome people very much to add questions to the chat so that we can engage them and include them in our discussions during the morning. I will start with a very short introduction to EuropaBio and indeed our National Associations Council, which brings you this event today. So EuropaBio, as you will know, is the cross-sectoral industry voice for biotechnology in Europe, and it works incredibly extensively across sectors. As biotechnology becomes more integrated into modern products and processes and plays an increasingly important role in ensuring the security of our medicines and indeed the advancement of our medicines and the security of things such as our food supply and our ability to address significant targets such as the Green Deal. And a really key part of our work is through our National Associations Council, because this is, of course, really where the work is done on the ground nationally. And we are very proud to represent over 20 countries across Europe through the National Biotechnology Associations, who really work with their own governments to enable the growth and investment into biotechnology and its translation into commercial products and processes. And of course, with that comes investment into infrastructure, employment, skills development. And this is really where the economic engine of Europe lies. So we are really proud to work with all of our National Association members. And although we focus on Belgium today, we all work together across the countries to create the economic landscape that we have now in Europe. So today we turn to Belgium, and in EuropaBio, we developed a National Associations Council presidency focus to really help emphasize the national priorities that drive the development of presidencies as they are delivered in Europe. And Belgium presides over the Council of the EU in the first half of 2024 for the 13th time. And there is no doubt now that the European Union stands at a point of significant change. And we also have, this sits within a global context, but we also have institutional and national policy cycles changing this year. So we will have multiple elections during 2024. We will also develop a new European Parliament, and with probably a very different political balance, and introduce a new Commission mandate. So for its presidency programme, the Belgian government really underscores its commitment to advancing a global Europe, really strengthening its competitiveness, pursuing and accelerating Europe's green transition, and reinforcing the health agenda. And we saw a very strong performance from Belgium during the COVID crisis, when you really saw the power of biotechnology through the manufacturing of vaccines and the amazing progress that amazing contribution that Belgium made to global supply. And we talk about these things, and they are really priorities across the green and the health agendas where biotechnology plays a critical role. And today is all about exploring that through the context of the Belgian presidency. So Belgium is leading discussions on several European policy commitments, and these will really define the biotechnology landscape for Europe and its ability to create new products and services. So the files that we have in front of us right now within the Belgian presidency include the revision of the general pharmaceutical legislation and also the proposal for new genomic techniques within plants. These are two pivotal legislations. And of course, there are many other layers of legislation and changes going on right now, which will enable their effective implementation and uptake at scale by industry. So we also see during the presidency, we will see, very importantly, a European Commission non-legislative initiative on biotechnology and biomanufacturing. And this is a very important announcement for both EuropaBio and Europe, because we see globally a really big strategic and policy focus on biotech and biomanufacturing. And it's very important that Europe recognizes where it sits globally for biotechnology and understands the strategic decisions and the industrial focus it's going to have to enable it to remain and use its competitive position globally. So with our presidency summit today, we host small and large companies within the panels that we have coming up, plus national biotechnology associations, policymakers, and key opinion leaders. and we will be discussing advanced therapies for rare diseases and the role of microorganisms within agri-food and industrial applications. And this all takes us to the next steps for European biotechnology, which we will pull together into a report and recommendations that we will share after this summit. It's also Rare Diseases Awareness Month, so we will start our first panel discussion on healthcare biotechnology, moderated by our National Associations Council Chair and Board Member, Tineke van Hooland from the Belgium's Biotechnology Association. So I will stop talking and hand over with great pleasure to Tineke to open our first panel of the morning. So thank you very much, Tineke.
Thank you very much, Claire, for the nice introduction. And being, of course, a Belgian citizen, very proud to open this conference made in Belgium for Europe. And before we deep dive, let's say, into the panel of rare diseases, I'm very happy to introduce to you our first guest speaker, and whom else than the advisor to the Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo, Thomas van Kang, to introduce us into the priorities for the Belgian Council presidency. First, a few words, of course, on our guest speaker. As said, he currently works as advisor on European-related issues at the cabinet of our Prime Minister, but he started his career in the private sector in consulting, and then he joined the United Nations and later on the European Union, and he has held very different positions in that. He's back in Brussels since 2015, and he has been the assistant to the Director General of DG Santé in his latest job before coming to the cabinet. So I would say, Thomas, the floor is yours to give us an overview of the Belgian Council presidency priorities.
Good morning, Tineke. Good morning to everyone, and thanks a lot for having me. As you said, Tineke, actually, I used to work at the European level, where we interact mostly with European federations. So for me, it's a very interesting experience to be here with all the national associations, because at the European level, you don't always get these 27 shades of red or green or white biotech. So thanks for having me in this discussion. For me, it's extremely interesting. That's not to minimize the role of the European federations, by the way. I just want to flag, I think you're very fortunate in the field of biotech, having seen a few sectors. You have very vocal advocates in Belgium representing you. I mean, I see Jerome is here. I've seen him work on policy papers overnight to inform and help our political decision makers understand the topic of biotech. Tineke is ready to jump on a plane to go and pitch biotech to Davos last minute. So I know many other sectors that would love to have advocates like you have here, and they do that out of genuine interest and believe in the sector. So, okay, enough flattering. I just wanted to say this before starting. The presidency, I mean, there is this very interesting program that you all can read, and I will not bore you reading it out for you, but maybe highlight a couple of points for this presidency. So this presidency, and I think Claire said Belgium leads the discussion. The role of the presidency is really to be a honest broker in discussions. Sometimes Belgium has views that may not be the views of the councils, and the role is not to impose your view, but to manage a European view on all the topics. But this presidency comes at the end of the legislative term of the European Commission, which has implications and means that we really divided the work in two stages. You have the first one, where we still currently are, which aims at closing as many deals or agreements as possible on legislative files that are and have been in the pipeline. And maybe I can mention a couple after. Claire already started. And then in a second phase, towards the last months of the presidency, just before the European elections, there will be more of a prospective work and a reflection on the future of Europe in biotech, but not only. That consists of what is called the strategic agenda, so helping shape the agenda of the future Commission. So this is a a very nice time to have the presidency, both to try and close files and to explore new areas. The official program that you will see, it has these three themes of strengthen, protect, prepare. And if you look at the health priorities that are described, they fit very well in these three pillars as well. Just to mention a few files maybe and go a bit more that are relevant to you. One, where we had a negotiation last night, I think until 1 o'clock, is called the European Health Data Space. And I mean, you know better than me the importance of data in your field of work. And the idea is really to tap into the huge potential there is in the huge volume of health data that is collected routinely, but not used to its full potential. So it really wants to develop what is called this secondary use of data, as opposed to the primary use being that use for the healthcare of the person, so the roaming of your data in Europe, which is good. But the secondary use is really to make it available for research, policy, medicine development in the future. And there, I think negotiations are progressing well. The Belgian presidency is still aiming at reaching an agreement within this mandate in the coming weeks, actually. But what came out from it, and what I think is a relevant theme in biotech, is that it all depends on trust, basically. And Claire mentioned the new genomic technique files. I think the food biotech sector is also one where there is not always a rational discussion, but it's really about explaining, teaching, demonstrating. As long as trust is not there, we see that it's hard to get an agreement. And in that, the European Parliament represents the different sensitivities you have among the citizens. And I think it's really important in a field like biotech to make the case, reassure, explain, and be extra pedagogical in a way. That would be it for the health data space. The second one that Claire mentioned was the pharmaceutical strategy. There again, it's a huge chantier where we really want to reconcile both this issue of affordable access to medicines for all patients wherever they are in Europe, and this importance of having an innovative and functioning pharmaceutical sector in the EU. And there also you see different sensitivities. I think the file is so huge that this one will not be concluded under this presidency, but Belgium really aims to make progress on a chapter that is focusing on shortages, where Belgium has been vocal over the past years, also through our health minister, Mr. Van den Broek. But so the idea is really to bring the file forward without concluding it fully. Then maybe I'll also jump on the last one that Claire mentioned, the upcoming initiative on biotech and biomanufacturing. So I'm sure you've seen over the last year and a half, I would say biotech has really become more and more prominent again on the European agenda. It was mentioned in this strategy for long-term competitiveness. Then we picked it up in the strategy for economic security in Europe. It's also flagged as one of these key industries in a big program called STEP. So it's the Strategic Technology for Europe platform. I mean, you've seen it recurrently coming back up to this point where the Commission is in the coming weeks normally coming out with a communication on biotech and biomanufacturing. And there, for me, it's more a call for an invitation or for action to you, to all the members in all their member states and in Brussels. It will be, as Claire said, a non-legislative initiative. So that means it's not going to create new things at European level, but policy communication is good at putting a topic on the policy agenda, at setting out priorities. And that's the perfect thing to do, again, since we are at the end of a legislative term and a new one will start. So when this comes out, I think you are the best place to give it life in a way by adopting position papers on what the Commission will announce, by organizing stakeholder events, conferences, discussions, really to, once the topic is on the agenda, to keep it, give it the shape that you think is important and keep it running until the next mandate, where I think it could be an important policy areas to explore for the next Commission. In particular, when we speak of reconciling sustainability and competitiveness, I think you're a case in point as a sector in a way where this can happen concretely. So my invitation to you is, when this Commission communication comes out, it's really the beginning of something, not the end. So use it as much as you can. I would leave it here for now. I'm happy to stay with you and listen to the discussion and take questions at some point if that's useful.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And I like that, 27 shades of green, red, and white. Let's keep using that in the future as well. I heard you talking about trust and the need to continue to sensibilize about what we do in the entire biotech space, and I think also the end-to-end value chain from early discovery to further R&D and production. And this will come back in the debate as well. Happy to hear that the European Biotech and Biomanufacturing Initiative is in the pipeline. So I heard you well that once the communication is out, that we need to keep it, I would say, hot and burning from all possible sides, whether it is from the national associations or from the European Association. We're working on that from EuropaBio perspective as well, so you can certainly count on that one. To provide you and also I think the DGs that are involved as well with the proper ideas. So indeed, if there are any questions, put them in the chat. We will come back to that in the end. I don't think there are questions for the moment. No, so that means that, you know, we can start with the discussion, and feel free as well, Thomas, if you want to still intervene in the discussion, just let me know. But let me first introduce, of course, the other speakers in the debate as well. I have four gentlemen with me. So the first one is Jerome Van Biervliet. He's the managing director at the Flemish Institute for Biotechnology, which is called the VIB. I also have Philippe Gijsels. He's the vice president global public affairs at Ipsen. I have another Philippe De Backer. He's senior partner at Newton Biocapital. And we also have Eric Halioua. He's CEO and president of the board at PDC Line Pharma. So welcome, gentlemen, to the debate that we're going to have, with a specific focus on advanced therapies for rare diseases. And let me maybe start with you, Jerome, because, you know, Thomas highlighted European Biotech Initiative. Certainly there will also be a focus on everything related to research and development. That is exactly what you do. You work together with other universities and research centers. So could you elaborate a little bit more? If we look at the evolution of basic research and advanced therapies landscape in Belgium, what are the key elements and the priorities that you would see for Europe in terms of how to translate the basic science into an economic value?
Yes, and thanks a lot, and thanks for the invitation to this very nice discussion, and happy to contribute. I think indeed the first and most important part, which will not be a surprise to any of the audience, it's really about an ecosystem. So it's a transition of exploring the potential of nature with all the modern tools we have in basic science to address fundamental issues of understanding first, but then very quickly transition into how can we now apply this to serve an unmet medical need, an unmet societal need, to change society with novel technology and products. So that then is the role of indeed an institute like VIB. We are very much engaged in both the former as well as the latter, and we are, let's say, continuously thinking about how to make this process more efficient. Of course, that's still from a public point of view or an investor point of view, just the starting point. We really need to be able to transition from a public institution perspective, innovations that can be handed over to the private sector, whether they are existing companies such as the ones online here, or investors such as Newton Biocapital, be able to transition this to the hands of private players. Why? Because obviously we are a very risky, let's say, industry. These things take a long time to develop, and so obviously that's so the key priorities derive from that. I think overall there is a role to play to harmonize across Europe the efficiency of the process of doing basic science and translating it into investable data points, investable data sets. So I think from a European point of view, there is a need to invest in anything that makes that more efficient, whether that is training and investing in tech transfer offices, whether that is training and building the next generation of entrepreneurs, really broadly understanding, but also, for example, the things that were already mentioned, the European health data space is a very important source for both the basic science as well as the translational science. So these initiatives are absolutely crucial to make it more efficient. And I mean, overreaching, I think the next step is then indeed stimulating investment in those early innovations across the geography of Europe. There is still significant gaps with regards to the US. If you look at it's anywhere between 3 and 5x, depending on early stage versus late stage investments in biotech versus the US. And it's 7x when you look at the stock markets when companies go public. So we are still at a significant disadvantage. So I think we should liberate and stimulate investment. One way to do that is to make things easier. Deregulate or make a regulation easier, let's put it this way. Regulation is in charge of taking the balance between, on the one hand, the opportunity and the risk for the society. That's a very fair role, but we still have a multiple level of this activity. And I think there's a great opportunity to harmonize and really to create a single market for biotech products. So that's perhaps a lot, of course. I think there's still another few things that we could touch upon, but I think those are already some ideas perhaps to discuss later.
Yes, absolutely. And I've written down the efficiency of translating science. I would like to further discuss on that with Eric, and then also stimulating investment, then further discuss with Philippe De Backer as well, and then to hear the point of view from Philippe Gezer as well. So, but let me start with you, Eric. So your company is a spin-off company developing personalized cancer immunotherapies. So Jerome talked about efficiency of translating science. How have you seen that process for you? So from the beginning, let's say, over then the clinical trial phase where you're in, and you're now also investing in the next step, which is basically the manufacturing capabilities and capacities. You're on mute, Eric.
Okay, can you hear me?
So, yes, we can.
Thank you, Tineke. So, in fact, the company has been founded in 2014, first in France, because it's a spin-off, as you said, Tineke, from the technology coming from the French Blood Bank, which is a very large organization, and it's a cell line that we're using, loaded with specific component called peptide to develop cancer vaccines. And we decided, when I joined the company in 2016, to develop the company in Belgium, and we are based in Liège, in the south part of Belgium. And we moved from 2 people to 43, 45 now. And we started the clinical trial in 2020 with the first patient just before the COVID, by the way. The first patient was 1 month before the COVID. Now we are completing the clinical trial, and 1 month is complete. And we raised 61 million euros of funding, half in equity, half in non-dilutive funding. So it's one of the big advantage we found here in Belgium, the access to this non-dilutive funding, and that allow us to develop the product and the first phase 1/2 of clinical trial. So the clinical trial we are running is ongoing in 5 countries in Europe. So it's only Europe for the moment, in 17 countries, in France, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, and Germany. And so this process has been, we passed through different stages, but I would say the fact being in Belgium was definitely a very positive element, and due to the access to the funding, clinical trials as well, access to a regulatory body that is flexible enough and understand, the characteristic of ATMP, because we're in cell and gene therapy, which is a specific area that requires specific skills. So we find it in Belgium. I would like to underline the positive point first. And we get access to the funding by a mix of Asian investor, because we have Asian investor in the company in equity, and Belgium investor. And that is due to the first licensing deal we signed with an Asian company, LG Chem, before the starting of the clinical trial. So I would say to get access to funding to develop clinical trial, it's something where now I would say in Europe, a lot of things has been done and it is positive. We are working now on the second stage of development of the company because we want to do a phase 2 randomized study. And here we are talking about a lot of money, you know, even more from what we have raised so far since the beginning, since the foundation of the company. And it's where the situation can become more complex in terms of funding. It has been already explained by Jerome, and I think it will be more developed later by the representative of investor that is present, by Philippe De Backer. And it's where, as it has been said, the access to funding is something that needs to be developed. You know, stimulation to investment for company at all stage. I would not just early stage, because I would say in early stage, there is already a lot of things existing in Europe. We can, of course, enhance. But if you want to keep, you know, the good technology and the good company in Europe for a long time, you need as well to have along the value chain of investment, big investor still making investment, and stock markets. You know, we still don't have a NASDAQ equivalent in Europe. And that if we can get this NASDAQ equivalent in Europe would be a big boost for the development of biotech as well. In terms of tech transfer, in terms of access to technology, in terms of patent, there's still things to do, but I would still stay positive, you know, of what's happening in Europe. Investment, access to people now start to be a talent, to be an issue, because there's more and more company, which is a good thing in Belgium, and we see the same trend in Europe, but especially in Belgium. So developing training, access to new talent, stimulating the young generation to do science as well is important. And we have our GMP facility now, and we decided to have our GMP unit recently, and that as well requires specific skills in terms of people, in terms of talent, that need to be stimulated. But what I would say, just to summarize my presentation, I can provide you more input later.
Yes, thank you so much, Eric, for giving a little bit the journey that you have faced in a nutshell, let's say. But I heard some interesting things which I would like to discuss further with Philippe De Backer. Philippe, NASDAQ equivalent in Europe, yes or no? What's your view? I think the screen is freezed. Philippe, can you hear us? De Backer? I don't think so. Okay, maybe we'll let him come in again, and let me turn first. So we'll park that question on the, let's say, the funding parts. Would be interesting to hear his view, because of course Philippe also has an experience in politics, used to be in the European Parliament, and I think he's back. Philippe?
Yes, sorry, I had a bug in my Wi-Fi. My apologies.
Okay, you're back. So I will repeat the question which I wanted to ask you following the talk from Eric. He said if we would have a NASDAQ equivalent in Europe, that would be a good idea. What's your view on that?
I agree. When I was still in the European Parliament, I wrote a report on how to give access to especially SMEs, innovative SMEs, to the stock market. And there are a lot of recommendations in there that a lot of people are still waiting for the European Commission to implement. And so I think Eric is right and Jerome is also right. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face today still in Europe is fragmentation. Fragmentation on the regulatory side of things, but also on the financial side of things. And so, for example, if you look at the structure of the capital markets in the US, they're much deeper, they're differently organized. And this fragmentation hampers the financing of innovative SMEs, not only in biotech, but also in other industries. And so I think this plea for, let's say, a more integrated financial market, capital markets, can indeed be a huge step forward. across the whole value chain, because we're talking here with Newton, for example, we do early stage investment, but of course these companies needs to go to phase 2, phase 3 commercialization, and we see, and as such, it's not a bad model that the large pharma is taking care of the latter part of that. And of course, it allows the financial system to function also because it creates exits and new money flowing in, which can be invested in new projects. But we want also to make sure that these companies stay independent a little bit longer, so that there also can be a little bit more competition, a little bit more diversity. So I think that's also important. The same goes for the regulatory part. The fragmentation also there really hampers the implementation of truly innovative elements. For example, if you look at CAR-T, we see a huge increase in clinical trials all across the globe, but only 20% are done in Europe, while we should be at the forefront of that. And the reason is that it's sometimes complicated to do studies over different countries in different regions. There are some different rules about ethical committees, compliance, and things like that, and it just adds to the complexity. So also there, I think Belgium is doing a good job. We created very clear regulation on IP, on clinical trials, but we really have to make sure that this is implemented all across Europe in the same way, and it would help also counteracting this fragmentation. And the last point, I think that there's also an important element in the risk and reward. Jerome rightly put out that whenever a scientist discovers something and puts something forward, we know that the chances of success and bringing the product to the market are quite slim. But we do want to do it, and we want to take that risk also as an investor because we believe it can contribute to a better life for patients. And so in that sense, we also need the governments to accept that there's innovation going on. They will have to adapt that regulation to that innovation. For example, if you see the wave of personalized medicine, but you have to go through the whole clinical trial situation. No, you have to really designate specifically for rare diseases, for others, different rules on how to bring products to the market. And there also Europe and Belgium can play a forerunner. I know that in the previous government, Marie De Blok, and I helped with that when I was a minister also, was pleading for more collaboration, for example, in the rare disease space between countries on giving market access and reimbursement. And I think this is really the way forward, because in the end, when therapies will become more and more personalized, everybody will have only a rare disease because it will be linked to your genetic and your environment. So this is, I think, the mentality that also needs to change within policymakers to follow on and create regulation. It creates a space where innovation can happen, where innovation can come to the market, and where we can use all the tools that are and all the knowledge that is available in Europe. And I think the point of Jerome also on the data space is super important. Maybe we can go a little bit more into detail on that. But there are really elements where Belgium has already implemented a lot, and it's the reason why we are one of the front runners when it comes to biotech, life sciences, and pharma. And I think Europe can learn from that. And this integration, let's say, based on the Belgian model, can really help boosting the biotech and life sciences ecosystem all across Europe.
Maybe Tineke, if I may add, just to sort of take up discussion here as well. I 100% agree with Philippe, and perhaps one idea that I would hope actually Europe would entertain, and I realize this is not evident in the way Europe is constructed, but is to work for specifically high-tech/biotech, which is both in regulation as well as access to the capital markets and initiatives in that sense, with a coalition of the willing. In other words, a set of member states who say, listen, there is not such a difference between a Dutch patient and a Belgian patient when it comes to evaluating a novel technology on risk and benefit. It's the same thing. So why don't we simply align or integrate or merge even both the regulatory framework, but the oversight as well, both on financial as well as regulatory. There's always oversight. And there is a tendency in Europe, always, because of this two-step process, which is for biotech less relevant than for other sectors in society. Basically a tendency to gold plate, to say, okay, well, actually, we do it this way. In Belgium, we do it this way. In the Netherlands, we do it this way. In Luxembourg, we do it this way. In Germany, we do it this way. So there's 27, we do it this way, which is basically putting us at a significant disadvantage. And that filters through to investments, that filters through to innovation, that it's really all. So I think this idea of coalition of the willing, I think personally, I would be in favor of proposing that the policymakers really align around this idea to make things move forward. And then obviously this can grow.
Absolutely, and let me come back on that one. But I have one more question I would like to ask to Philippe De Backer before I go to Philippe Gijsels. So yesterday, a very nice announcement was made to our Prime Minister and Ursula von der Leyen on the need for having an industrial policy in Europe as well, or an industrial deal, meaning putting the focus on basically also, if you look at our sector, the upscaling and how to anchor the activities in Europe. Now, it was said by Eric to do that. There's a need for a lot of money. So if we look at the venture capital culture in Europe compared to the United States, Asia was mentioned. Where are we, Philippe? What should we do? Should we aim higher? You talked about, change of mindset of policymakers, but do we also need a change of mindset of investors?
Yes, I think that because of the history of the capital markets in Europe and because of the, let's say, the social economic system that we have set up, we are much more dependent on, for example, when it comes to reimbursement of medicine on the state. And this, of course, creates a different incentive. The primary market for life sciences and biotech and pharma is still in the US. Why? Because the prices are higher. This, of course, is to the detriment of the patient, because we know that the cost of the healthcare system in the US, because it's poorly managed in that sense, is worse for the patient. So there is a trade-off to be made. On the one hand, I see the need for incentives. Incentives matter in an economy. I'll give you one example. I just left the European Parliament when the new medtech regulation was voted. You saw an exodus of medtech companies going to the US, because then the regulation in the US became a little bit more simpler and transparent, while 10 years ago it was the inverse. And so in the end, these incentives either create a benefit or a disadvantage for your patients, because the technology will be available sooner or later at a certain price. And so, yes, we need to upscale. Yes, we need to combat that fragmentation. And yes, we also need a change of mind, not only with the investors who are, some venture capitalists I consider as bankers, and bankers are risk averse. And the reason for venture capital to come in is because we are risk takers. We love to see the risk and we love to take the reward of that. And we know that what is the upside and the downside. For bankers, that's different. So yes, we need that change in mentality, but we also need a change in the system. If, for example, in the Netherlands, you see large pension funds, but if the regulation only allows for them to have 1 or 2% put into these high-risk investments, there's not a lot of money available. And so we can create a larger pool already by finding also the right balance in financial regulation at the European level and allowing these long-term investors, insurance companies, banks, pension funds to come on board of long-term investors like venture capitalists, because we are in with companies for 10 years. So it means that there is an alignment of incentives at that moment, but the regulation hampers that. And so I'm not wanting to advocate to go back before the financial crisis, not at all, but there is, I think, a readjustment to be made.
Okay, very nice call for the right balance at European level to make available more funds. Thank you, Philippe De Backer. Philippe Gijsels, you're working for a mid-sized biotech company, if I can call it like that. So you're also, investing in rare diseases. So what are the key elements for your company to invest in rare diseases, having heard the conversation and where, let's say, the challenges and opportunities are?
Okay, thanks, Tineke. And indeed, we are a mid-sized biopharma company. And as Philippe already outlined, we are also part of the investment ecosystem, which is a very competitive environment, of course. And so what are the key elements for us to decide whether to invest in one or another compound? And I believe Jerome already introduced it in his introduction. It's basically the first point is the excitement around the science to address some kind of unmet medical need, which is, of course, huge when we speak about rare disease. So today, everybody knows the numbers probably. There's around 6,000 to 8,000 known rare diseases, but only 5% today have been treated. And most of them are in the more what we call prevalent rare diseases. And so the 95% which is left are rather in the what we call the ultra rare disease space, where we've been talking about risk environment, the risk that investors and biopharma companies take to do research in these areas is even bigger. And just to get you some numbers, the sister company Bio, they made an analysis on the cost of R&D across the biopharma space, and that has doubled between 2010 and 2018. Also, the time to register the products has been much longer between 2010 and 2018. So that's the first thing, the science, the excitement around the science. And then, of course, we look on the compatibility and the complementarity in terms of portfolio, in terms of organization, also in terms of science, if it's compatible with the strategy we take. Also the differences between, global markets or US only or ex-US, because a lot of deals that we do today, they are really tailored, and sometimes, the licenses are kept in the US. And as has been said before, the US market is, of course, a much higher value. I believe the global biopharma market today is above 1 trillion. Half of that is located in the US. And then the last element, and I believe all of us here also know that concept, which is perhaps some kind of a jargon, but we look at the risk-adjusted net present value, of course. And the elements that we take there is, of course, the value in the longer term, the regulatory environment which is existing, so the chances of success to get a regulatory approval, but also in terms of access. And there, of course, we have a big gap in Europe, but also in a country like Belgium, which is a kind of a paradox, because if you look at the European figures in terms of investment into R&D in Europe, Belgium is amongst the highest, so equal to France and Germany almost. So which is kind of paradoxical, because if you look at the access piece, Belgium is rather on the slow end in terms of uptake of our innovations. And then, of course, another element to determine the risk-adjusted net present value is also the concept of intellectual property, the length of the patent, but also other intellectual properties that exist, such as regulatory data protection, orphan exclusivity, which is often very important in the case of rare disease. So, and while the system is kind of changing, on the regulatory end, we think at European level we can have some, has been mentioned before as well, some efficiency gains, and I think the European institutions are working around that. But on the access piece, we can also improve some of the conditions there to kind of bolster that risk-adjusted net present value, and to value the innovations we bring a little bit more, the value for society, but more importantly, the value to the patients we bring.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. And this brings me perfectly to, let's say, the next topic, and it was already highlighted. One of the things that is currently under review is, of course, the pharmaceutical legislation, the general pharmaceutical legislation. It's still under review, and there are a lot of question marks, of course, related to that. Also for EuropaBio, who has commissioned Charles Rivers Associates a study. And one of the elements of the study is that looking at the current proposal that for rare diseases, it will decrease the attractiveness of Europe as an R&D hub or market target, because today there are some proposals to decrease the duration of the orphan designation validity to 7 years from a previously unlimited time. There's also baseline decrease in the orphan market exclusivity, etc. So which puts a huge risk and, let's say, also pressure on all smaller companies investing in that area. So for the remaining time, I would like to have a short discussion on that one. Maybe to continue with you, Philippe, There are also changes on, you know, or what is the impact of the proposed GPL changes, let's say on Ipsen's research and development in rare diseases? You know, how do you look at the current proposal?
Yeah, first, perhaps I want to make a point, you know, on what you just introduced. So, FPA, the sister company, also made an assessment on the impact of the current proposal of the GPL on biopharma investments in Europe. And you know, since we are in a Belgian panel here, Belgium has a lot to lose here. So because it's such an R&D ecosystem, Belgium has a lot to lose, you know. So the investment gap between the US and Europe has been, you know, growing since 2 decades. So 20 years ago was kind of an equal level of investment, whereas today we have an investment gap of around 20 billion, and actually China is catching up as well. And so we made the calculation, and I think Germany is the biggest loser, but Belgium comes second when it comes to the impact of the current proposal of the GPL. So, you know, I think for Ipsen, in the short term, of course, the GPL will not change the current R&D, but rather, you know, what we just said before, the investment decisions that come later because of, you know, the risk-adjusted net present value. And this is mainly because, you know, we see a reduced baseline for IP incentives. And that has an implication and a consequence for, you know, the value we can get out of our marketed products. So I think, you know, this is in essence for us, you know, the most impactful elements. Besides that, it's not only negative, of course. There's a lot of good things. So we see the regulatory streamlining, the regulatory sandboxes which are being proposed. These are all, of course, very good things, especially in the context of, you know, high complex medicines, which quite often rare disease are treated with. So often drugs, but also advanced therapies. You know, these would benefit, of course, from a better regulatory system that can, you know, assess these kind of new technologies.
Okay, thank you, Philippe, for giving your perspective. I would like to turn to the other Philippe as well, because you've worked, as you said, you were a member of the European Parliament. There are proposals. Maybe the philosophy is good to say, okay, let's reinforce the ecosystem. But what we see in the proposals is that potentially it will have a huge impact on our ecosystem. So if you hear or if you read the current proposals, what's your view? What could be the impact on investment decisions? Will companies and you continue to invest in rare diseases if that would be the case? Or you know, will there be maybe a shift to other therapeutic areas, leaving basically the patients with rare diseases alone?
Yeah, I see multiple things happening. Yeah, on the one hand, I see good intentions in legislation, so that there is indeed an effort to harmonize, to make things more clear. But there's also a political agenda in that, and there I think there are some issues, some good things, some bad things. I think, for example, what the European Commission is trying to do in this legislation is at least trying to address some of the spear points. So, for example, AMR, we know it's a huge problem. We know that there's not a real business model behind to develop new antibiotics. So there's now, let's say, incentives which are being given by society, by government to go there and to develop that. So that, I think, is, for example, a good element in the legislation. But you also see that, and that I think is more or less on the instigation of the member states, there is also this approach of cost cutting, in a sense that let's keep the costs under control, let's make sure that there are no excessive benefits. And But then I think sometimes we forget the risk that is involved in this whole situation, not only in bringing a product to the market and the time and effort and money that it takes, because we see the successes, and luckily we see the successes, but there are many more failures that we don't see, and that also cost a lot of money. So I think the legislation should take that also into consideration. And thirdly, what I really advocate and what I miss is indeed, again, this next step in integration. We know that at the European level, we have EMA, so we have on the market access front, legislation is quite clear. It can be simplified, it can be done differently, but in the end, there is a gateway. But then the trouble starts. Again, you need 27 negotiations for reimbursement. You need 27 different market introductions. Sometimes there are additional questions. Sometimes you have to position yourself differently. The economic reasoning behind is interpreted differently. The HTA is different. So let's harmonize that also. We know that we're going to evolve into the direction of personalized medicine, more rare diseases, more specialized treatments, which will cost more money. So let's adapt also, or start adapting the system also in that direction. And I lack that element in the legislation to make sure that also in the future, there's a streamlining in clinical trials, investment, regulatory harmonization and approval, and bringing the product as quickly as possible to the patient. And I think there it's really that's where the crux is in the difference when I look around. Even in Asia, we invest also in Japan, for example. You see the dynamics. There are things going on. People understand that the ecosystem needs to evolve and change. And I think it's also the mission for Europe and for Belgium in particular, because we are in the front of biotech innovation in Europe. Again, let's export that model, but do it in an integrated way. And I think the legislation really lacks that element to make sure that it's future-proof.
Yeah, maybe Tineke, to add to that. Again, and for sake of discussion, perhaps as well, I really agree, and I always see the reflex. Obviously, the regulators feel responsible, and they are, to keep the system sustainable. So that's a valid concern. Indeed, there's very good things happening, but the reflex, of course, is always to, again, more regulate, rather than why don't you make a proportional? If you decrease incentives on the one hand, why don't you make it more attractive by giving a single access to a bigger market? Avoid these national things. I mean, make that in any negotiation, right? In any negotiation which happens face to face, you have a trade-off that's being set. This on that particular aspect, I'm not sure that trade-off is there fully yet. So again, and by creating a single coalition of the willing, or all of Europe if possible, market space for a single introduction in a fast and rapid way, that's something on the side of the public administrator to change. That would create a huge incentive in of itself, and actually should actually be a cost reduction even, perhaps.
Okay, very interesting. Coalition of the willing. Eric, you're based in Belgium. You first came from France, so in Europe. You said you also work with Asia. So what is, your view on the upcoming changes in the European legislation versus what you maybe also see happening in other countries?
Yeah. So what is important to have in mind is that we're in international competitions, and all the incentives that Europe has developed over the years, related to orphan disease designations, the timeline of protections, is considered as a given now by all the investors. If you change it, you decrease strongly the attractiveness of Europe, and you include and use a kind of unstable and unpredictable environment, and that the investor from Asia and US doesn't like at all. So that is just a global message I would like to give, because it's not easy to get funding if at the top of that you put unpredictability around it, it becomes even worse. Of course, so far things have been moving well, and I hope the negotiation on the new legislations will go in the right way. But we need to be very careful on that, because we need to raise a lot of money. If we are in discussions with Asia and US investors now, according to the size of the round we want to do, and if they realize that the attractiveness in Europe is not strong enough, they would push, to move the headquarters, like what happened in some of the good Belgian company already, in whatever Boston or in Asia. So we just need to be really, and it's not what we want. I'm talking about the management of the company and the Belgian investor, but we need to be careful on this aspect because it's a reality, it's day-to-day reality that we need to handle. And the intellectual property protection as well is an important element to have in mind. The orphan drug designation prolongs, the protection, the market access to the product. US is doing a lot of things, and they have developed a lot of mechanisms at the top of high price, to develop the orphan disease, the personalized medicine. Why we are potentially in both personalized, and we could be in as well in orphan disease designation. So we need to be very careful on this element and to go on the right way and to choose the right way. And even if I understand the cost cutting sometimes obligations, but let's do in a clever way, if I may use this word.
Absolutely, and I'll use that word to basically wrap up because we only have 5 minutes left before to go to the next debate. But we still have Thomas from the Prime Minister's cabinet with us, and maybe you have some final messages for him, because we are still in the presidency. And as said, there will be focus on the European Biotech Initiative. There will be focus on the industrial need and industrial policy as well. So if there is one single message that you would still like to convey on the importance for Belgium, but then also the bigger reach, let's say, in Europe, how to make sure that we can continue to do our innovations, but that we can also upscale them and manufacture them. Basically, the model that Eric is currently rolling out, both doing R&D clinical trials and GMP manufacturing in Belgium. So let me start with you, Philippe Gezels. What's your final word, advice?
Well, what has been already said before, I think we also need a holistic approach. So the silo budgeting within Europe is a problem. So there needs to be, a holistic industry, healthcare debate, and in that sense, novel pricing and payment models also need to be kind of applied throughout Europe in a more harmonized way. And then lastly, there needs to be a little bit more solidarity also across the EU, because, today we have a system where, of course, countries refer to other countries in setting their prices. And then, below, we have contracting or schemes. So there needs to be a little bit more solidarity also across the EU countries to kind of provide, access to, all patients in Europe, because that's a huge problem, of course, that the European Commission also wants to address. So the problem of access and affordability.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. Jerome.
Well, maybe one thing I really want to stress, and I think it plays into the way the policymakers shape the environment for anything, well, the regulatory oversight here. It's really about biotech literacy. It's one of the priorities we've really pushed as a Belgium to make a strong, significant effort. We saw it with the COVID crisis. We were basically saved from being in lockdown by biotech innovations that accessed the market. There was a lot of willingness there, but it also had a backlash. If you talk to people that are talking to society, making a lot of fake news was happening. A lot of fake news still happens. Basically, fake stories are appearing and are influencing the general public, and therefore also the political representation. So I think biotech literacy is a technical subject. That's one. I think second, the biotech sector itself should probably do a better job of explaining what is possible if we harness the potential of nature to apply it for unmet societal needs. And third, I think, just bringing that message, repeating it, answering questions, making the trust piece has been mentioned before. So I think that, just as a finish, I think that should be a very important topic going forward.
Okay, we've heard about access from Philippe. You literacy trust, Eric?
Yeah, I would agree with everything has been said. I mean, to have an overall architecture in terms of legislation, the fundamentals, of the legislation, and to really understand the fundamentals of biotech company and SMEs, small biotech. And we need them, for a good economy and a future health system as well. Having a strong biotech means clinical trial will be, in general, being first in Europe, and it will be the European people that will be first treated with the new innovations. So it's important for a lot of topics to have a strong biotech system for Europe.
Okay, thank you. And then we end with Philippe. Philippe, the best of both worlds, the business world and the European Parliament world. So what's your final message?
Incentives matter. When you make legislation from the political side, you really have to understand what is the impact on the sector as a whole. We have constructed over the last 25 years a very vibrant ecosystem, which is internationally recognized as really a frontrunner globally out of Belgium. And I think that is important to sustain. And so the incentives that the Belgian government are giving internally remain important. But it's also important that from the government side, there is a push at the European level for this integration and for this coalition of the willing. And I think that Belgium has shown in its history that it's always been capable of bringing everybody together in achieving that. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time than we want. And I think from the private side, I think there indeed we have to continue to engage in dialogue and make clear what exactly are the needs for the future, not only today on the short term, but also think as private investors, as private entrepreneurs, holistically about how we can bring forward and move forward our sector.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I would like to conclude here and thank all my speakers. So Thomas van Kang, Philippe De Backer, Jerome Van Biervliet, Philippe Gijsels and Eric Halioua to be with us today. We will make a nice report of everything that was said here today, all of the recommendations as well. So we will certainly come back to the policymakers with that report. And let's turn maybe the 27 shades of green, red and white into 50 shades of gold, because we have a lot of assets in biotech in Belgium and in Europe. Thank you very much for being with us.